looks to me as though all of the important people for this panel session are here. So I think I can proceed. And I'll start by giving a little local colour. Well, it is, I should probably have a bit more light, but Jennifer mentioned that we'd had a storm today, and we've had a tree fall on our roof. So we're waiting for state emergency services and various other things to happen. But fortunately, the internet has not been affected by this, and I'm looking forward very much to this session. Now, in this session, we will focus on the implications of this changing world for leadership and governance of projects. And with us, we have three of the world's leading researchers in this area, Ralf, and Alfons and Andy. I'm now going to ask you if you could briefly introduce yourselves and tell us a little about your current research and interests relative to this topic. If I could start with you, Ralf.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me. I'm Ralf Müller, Professor of Project Management at BI, Norwegian Business School, and Editor-in-Chief of the Project Management Journal. My research interests are in leadership and governance, obviously, whereby I look at leadership from a human personality and interpersonal process perspective, and not so much from the perspective of leading countries or technology or other things, so to say. In the field of governance, I research governance for projects and networks of projects, but I also research on governmentality, the human side of governance. And currently I'm studying the governance of inter-organizational networks for projects. And for this, I look at a hierarchy of governance, starting with network governance for the individual network, then governance of networks for groups of networks, and then on top of that, the meta governance that gives the underlying rules of the game, typically provided by sponsors or governments, for how we can govern and manage projects.
Ralf, thank you very much. And Alfons, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Alfons Marrewijk. I'm a full professor of construction cultures at the Delft University of Technology and adjunct professor of project management at BI, Norwegian Business School, where Ralf is also working. Actually, I have a background. I was trained as a professional engineer and project manager before turning my attention to, I say, more cultural aspects of project management. Actually, I took up a course in cultural anthropology and did my PhD in organization anthropology. And actually, ever since, I used anthropological theories and methods for studying and understanding project management, leadership, and governance. And in especially complex and more larger mega projects. And actually it allowed me this approach to include topics such as the person of the leader. What is the leader? What kind of influences, what kind of narrative does he tell? What are the practices, the everyday practices in this kind of project? So how do people govern, how the practices of governance are actually done, but also looking at rituals and symbols and materiality of projects. So this is a more the cultural topic that I'm interested in, that focusing upon leadership and governance. And I work in close collaboration with public and private industry partners in the construction infrastructure, and frequently act as an expert consultant. I'm looking forward to the discussion this morning.
Thank you very much, Alfons. Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I hope everybody can hear me, and it's great to be here. Sounds like it's been a really good day. I'm the what's called the R.M. Phillips Freeman Chair and Professor of Innovation Management at the Science Policy Research Unit, which is well known for science policy, innovation management, and also an element of studying the project-based firm as well. And that is at the University of Sussex Business School. And I have a foundation funding for 5 years of research work to employ 2 researchers to work with me over the next few years. So I'm kind of looking forward to collaborations with people in that period. My research over the last 25 years really has examined how innovation occurs in either project-based firms and organizations, but also large complex projects or mega projects. And it's really the latter that I'll be talking more about today. I've focused on organizational capabilities and routines needed to manage and lead firms and projects. And my work's been really informed by the literature on dynamic capabilities and organizational routines. So it's rather than not so much the governance and leaders and individual leaders, but the kind of organizational capabilities that are needed to deliver these projects, which has really real implications for how they're managed and led. I've been heavily involved with leaders and at the top level and directors of mega projects in London over the last 15, 20 years, really, such as Heathrow, London Olympics, Crossrail, M25, PFI project, and more recently, the Westminster Restoration and Renewal project. And I've been part of a movement for innovation stimulated by Imperial College and UCL initially to improve the delivery of mega projects in the UK. And this is, started with work with Crossrail, but it's gone on to, implementing innovation strategies for Thames Tideway, the big sewer system in London, High Speed 2, and many other projects in the UK. In future, the research under the chair that I mentioned, funded by the foundation, is going to be focused on projects and project-based organizations and how they're managing the transition to net zero. And theoretically, there'll be a kind of a focus on innovation ecologies or ecosystems and the grand challenge literatures. So that's a bit of background about me.
Fantastic. Well, what a wealth of background, of research and experience we have to bring to this discussion. Now, as Jennifer talked about in the earlier session, and as we've been talking in the earlier session today, project leadership increasingly occurs in a context of technological developments, changing social values and grand challenges, which Andy's just mentioned, whether from a pandemic, the changing climate, or humanitarian crisis, or anything else that might arise. At the same time, perspectives on leadership are changing, from focus on behaviour of an individual to become more relational and connectively team-centred, potentially spanning divisional or organisational forms. And this represents a shift away from understanding leadership as authoritarian management to shared, distributed, participatory forms of leadership and governance that are required to respond to those social and technological changes and to meet the grand challenges. Now, you have all researched both leadership and governance in different ways, as we've just heard. How do you see approaches to leadership and governance evolving in this context? And again, Ralf, if we could start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Well, what I see is that the diversity of challenges and issues in projects increases, so we need more ways to tackle them. And that implies typically more trust in individuals to master their tasks, and with that, more democratic leadership styles. So in the current study, where we did 126 interviews worldwide, we heard that in the very successful projects, managers trust their people more and more. Yeah, they also say over the last 10 years, they develop much more trust into the people they lead and into the companies they work with. Yeah, and through that, they apply more and more democratic leadership approaches. Yeah, so that allows for increased empowerment, freedom for the individual to decide by himself, herself, on work-related questions. Yeah, for example, in our last leadership study, we identified the phenomenon which we call balanced leadership and horizontal leadership. And I was very glad to hear a few minutes ago that you already talked about that earlier today. Yeah, so in balanced leadership, the project manager empowers a team member to lead the project team, for example, to solve a particular issue. And then the project manager subordinates to that appointed leader for the time of the appointment. Yeah, that is a type of leadership that we only saw in projects so far. And it has not been matched by existing theories, which typically say exactly the opposite to a balanced leadership. And we are very interested in digging deeper into these types of phenomena. Similarly, the work with Alfons that we did on mega project leaders, it was very interesting to see how those publicly perceived heroes, the mega project leaders, are convinced of themselves as being incomplete leaders. They always rely on the team to find out what is best for the project. Especially this behavior then brings them out as authentic leaders who see leadership going beyond personal success. You're on mute, Lynn.
Thank you, Ralf. And I think what you were saying there about those leaders tied in with what Julian mentioned as a summary from the session this morning, which was about the humility of leadership in this kind of environment. So thank you for that. Alfons.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. To connect to the work that just Ralf told, is that I see two developments related to mega project leaders. We see that mega project leaders are and have become, over the last 20-25 years that I've been working in this industry with mega projects, they have become more reflective. And if I mean reflective, I see them reflecting upon their own management task, upon their own management behavior, upon how they behave, what their interaction is with their team, how the team is working. And they have much more attention for project values. So not only the outcomes, but also about what are we contributing towards. Has that meaning that this reflection also means to the influence of stakeholders? I think we have seen a real change towards the attitude of stakeholders, both human and non-human. And if I say non-humans, environmental issues of the underground, becoming more aware, animals becoming more aware and reflective upon that the project is not an island, but it's very engaged and very much entwined in society. Also, we see that they have more reflexive upon team and team cultures and project cultures, understanding that if the team doesn't work well and if it doesn't fit well and if there is no clear culture of collaboration within the project will fail. And so understanding them to be managing these project cultures. And trust has become, and I saw already a question saying, is trust is the result of, no, trust is something that's really on their agenda. They build trust, they have to build trust in order to get reciprocity among the different organizations involved. And trust has become really become an important issue for reflection for this mega project, and working in an intercultural setting with different cultures, different organization cultures, but also different national cultures. That's the first one. And the second one is that we see that these leaders, actually, they have become their own projects, as Tyrone Pitts and Carlson names it narrative capital. And that's the book that we did with Ralf and Natalie. That we see that these mega project leaders actually are really starting to become better and better in telling stories, telling narratives over where is this project, why is this project, how am I involved in the project, what have I done in the past, how have I become a mega project over time. They start writing books themselves, these mega project leaders. I have PhDs, mega project leaders doing their PhDs. They're starting to become much more reflective and more narrative, and also because they understand that counter narratives from society breaks in their ideas of what the project is about. So the understanding that this is a dynamic interaction or battlefield between narratives and counter narratives has become major now well, especially mega project leaders. And finally, if I have time left, Lynn, yes, okay. The approach to governance is what I see changing from a idea of a large or contract or you know, fix something that you put top down at the front stage of a large project, write down this is the way that we're going to govern this project. I see a change towards the governance doesn't stop at the start. You can write down that you're equal partnerships, or that you have that you will not blame each other, but during the process, so the practice of the actually governance as practice perspective, how you actually deal with these issues during the process, in order not to lose trust among each other, but to create trust, to build it up during the whole process. That's something that I actually see now much more the focus, much more researching, addressing the actually doing of the governance during the process. We did a study on the role of the underground infrastructures in mega projects. They were forgotten for a long time, and we see now that this during the project you suddenly pop up pipelines and things that you didn't know, bombs or whatever they were in the underground. So we see that if you govern, you cannot predict everything. You do not know what happens during this kind of projects. They're really, really high risky. So you need to actually execute the governance and look at from a practice perspective. And that's something that I see changing now. So that were my 3 points that I want to discuss with you, Lynn.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much, Alfons. And if everyone could prepare themselves, we do have a question, which is, please define governance. So I'll let you think about that as I hand over to Andy to follow on with this question of how you see approaches to leadership and governance evolving in this changing world. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, I mean, I think Ralf and Alfons have given us a great kind of overview of the actual, in a way, the thing that Julian was talking about, the shift in leadership from more hierarchical, vertical to sort of horizontal, distributed, reflective, and excellent stuff. You know, what I want to do now is, in a way, is based on my research, is look at the kind of the organizational context within which leaders have to work, and sort of bring out some slightly different, perhaps different perspectives. You know, if we look at traditional project management and leadership, really it's about stability, risk avoidance, and performing routinely. The assumption is that the environment is stable and unchanging. However, and as I'm sure you've been talking about through the day, projects are becoming increasingly complex and have to be delivered in a rapidly changing and uncertain environment. So a new approach to project management and leadership is required that emphasizes flexibility, adaptation, and speed. And this will require different skill sets, different ways of working, teaming, and so on. And in the work that I've done, some of the sort of key projects in the UK have recognized this need to strike a balance between the stability to deliver projects routinely against targets. And much of what happens in projects is really about having really effective processes, procedures, routines for doing that. But the balance also has to be about achieving the flexibility so that projects can flex, adjust, and respond to both unexpected problems when they arise, but also opportunities. New things happen during the life of a project, and they, you know, and it's important that projects are able to bring in those unexpected things, and often that's innovation. In our study of Crossrail, we found that before the project, the iPad didn't exist. During the project, the iPad was introduced to society, to the world, and they found that they could put the whole project on an iPad, and that transformed the way in which the project, you know, the people talked about and thought about the project. So you have to be open to opportunities. And in the management literature, I talked about dynamic capabilities, but a new term is ambidexterity. And this describes how organizations and leaders, and I think it applies to complex projects, but it means that the organizations and their leaders have to exploit their current capabilities and routines to perform well under stable and predictable and perhaps foreseeable conditions. But they also have to exploit opportunities to respond to the unforeseeable, to rapidly changing conditions. And I think this sort of balance is a really key thing. It's something actually that's been around a long time. James Webb recognized it in the NASA's Apollo moon landing in the 60s. Much of the project was very foreseeable, predictable, but there were always unforeseeable elements. And it's this balancing act that he recognized even then that is important. Project management scholars have introduced concepts like disciplined flexibility. Harvey Sapolsky talked about that in the development of the ballistic missile program, and targeted flexibility by Sylvain Lanf and Christophe Locke, who talked about elements in projects. So there'll be a lot of parts of big projects which are routine and they have to be managed routinely, but there will always be more uncertain and difficult parts. And so you can begin to think about the balancing between these different elements of flexibility and stability. So that I think today managers of large complex projects have until recently often avoided innovation and banished change. Yet in today's complex projects, we need leaders and dynamic teams to know when and how to adjust to change direction, adopt innovation, and respond rapidly. And in many of the large UK projects, we've seen new sort of delivery models that kind of require different forms of leadership. And I've seen that in my interactions with both leaders of the projects, but also the teams running these projects, that new forms of delivery models are kind of being put in place that put flexibility at the heart of this. Heathrow Terminal 5, they had a handbook. This is back in the early 2000s, where the delivery handbook talked about the need for flexibility, adaptability, flexibility of solutions, last responsible decision making. And that puts a big onus on leaders to be able to do that. And this kind of notion of ambidextrous leadership, I think, could be an interesting thing to look at in the future. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andy. So back to this question, which is, what is governance? So defining governance. Who'd like to have a go at that? Ralf, I thought, given that you've written books on the subject, this would be an ideal topic for you. Thank you.
Well, I would define it very simple and say it's steering management. Yeah, the steering of management. Give them the framework within which they can do their task. It's not about the task itself, it is what is allowed and what is not allowed in doing the task.
Okay, thank you. And I think that was Michael Buhagiar in the chat actually gave a reply to it as well, which was very much along those lines. He's probably read your book, Ralf. Knowing Michael, I think that would be right. Now, we had a question about trust, but Alfons, you actually dealt with that, I think, a little bit on the way through. So I might just go to another question, thanks to Natalie Smith, who was asked, is it harder to establish trust in digital projects? Because they're less tangible.
Can I say something about that?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So we have studied trust and trust development in projects, and what we see is that trust development is very much related to the expectance of how others are behaving themselves in the same way that you think that they should do. That would mean that in a digital setting, for example, with back office and front office, or with digital teams, trust can also be developed, but it has to be a central part of well, it's a laborious process, and you really need reflection sessions to discuss, okay, what is your normal way of governing, or what are your practices of dealing with conflicts? How do you, because people can have, especially in inter-organizational settings, they can have completely different backgrounds and different values over how to deal with issues. And if somebody of your team is behaving completely different than you expected that they would be, then you don't trust them anymore. But it could be that from his or her cultural background, it's quite normal to react like this. And we studied, for example, Dutch and Indian IT officers working together. And, you know, you can have cultural differences over what is a deadline, how to behave around a deadline, and how to mention that you have problems around deadlines. So then you say, no, the Indians are not to be trusted, or the Dutch, they are very direct, and they, you know, but it is about what you think that the others, how they should work. So trust development has to do with being predictable and understanding what the other is about and how you can be predicted. You know, I'm Dutch, I'm direct, you know, okay, so you can know the next time that I will be a little bit less direct. But so trust development is a laborious process, starting in the front, during the whole process, and bringing up topics of how would you react, and how do you perceive problems, issues, deadlines, governance, whatever issues in the project.
Yes, Ralf.
Yeah, I want to build on what Alfons just said, and stress that we need to distinguish between trust in leadership and trust in governance. Yeah, trust in leadership is about trust in people. Yeah, it's individual trust, and we build that through experience with the people. We build that through resonance with the people's thoughts and thinking. Trust in governance is an underlying mechanism. So a governance system is always either more trust-based or more control-based. Yeah, if you look at the policies that we have, for example, we can easily see whether the underlying thinking is a trust thinking or control thinking. Yeah, and coming back to the question that I saw in the chat room, yeah, about is it really good to have trust? Yeah, so when we take this governance trust, yeah, which is kind of an institutional type of trust, yeah, if we do not apply that, is that good? An example is Berlin Airport. Yeah, the construction companies offered a turnkey solution for 1 billion euros, but the politicians said we don't trust them. They want to make a lot of profit with that. Yeah, we can do it cheaper as politicians. And then they created a $1 billion loss from 2012 to 2020. Every year, €1 billion loss. Yeah, and that is the fatal outcome of a mistrust in an institution. Yeah, so trust is important. So even if the construction company would have made a bit more than their usual percentage of profit on that project, it would have still been much cheaper than the losses that occurred by having politicians running these projects.
Maybe can I just add a quick something to that, Lynn, if you don't mind? Sometimes I think you talked about balanced leadership, Ralf. Sometimes you kind of literally have to bang heads together to get trust, and that might sound contradictory, but I remember seeing in Crossrail they had 3 members of a delivery team all working in their silos, not working together, and the leader of the program said that actually this just can't go on. The project's going to fail. I mean, actually, other things did happen later which have delayed it, but it wasn't this. And so what they did was they created an organizational context for co-location, breaking up the different companies so that they could work together. And that was a top-down leadership decision to create that kind of cooperative, distributed teaming that you talked about, and Alfons has talked about as well. So sometimes, it's an example of, where literally you need a good top-down leadership occasionally at the right moment, bang heads together, and then things started to work a bit better after that.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is necessary in every project. Yeah. Somebody or some institution must have the overview and then step in with, for example, affiliative leadership style, as you just described it. Right.
Yes. So top-down dictated democratic leadership.
Yeah, something like that.
And I was thinking with the discussion of trust, and you had mentioned, for instance, democratic leadership, Ralf, and I was thinking how important trust was to that. So I'm interested that came round in the discussion. There is also a question which I saw in here, which I know there were a couple. How do you address the issue of misuse of trust?
Well, strategically, everything can be misused. Even culture can be misused or can strategically be used in collaboration. So sensitivity towards, is this a trust building, is this cultural issue, or is it strategically being used to put me out of position or to create a larger stake in an organization? That's always something that people have to take into account. Organization politics and power is always in our kind of project. So the misuse or use, strategic use of trust or the strategic use of cultural issues, that can be expected always and everywhere. And so the sensitivity of mega project leaders or people working in these kind of projects on is, yeah, where are we dealing with? To be really sensitive on these issues, I think that's a necessity of working in this kind of environments.
Yeah, building on that, I would add that transparency, which is one of the 4 governance principles underlying each governance system, transparency is very important here. So if we make it transparent who failed for what reason, then people have the knowledge base to decide next time, was this a one-time thing for this person or institution to fail, or is it something that we can expect in our project as well, and we better stay away from these people. So talking openly about the problems, talking openly about, as you said, misuse of trust, will give us the information that we can decide ourselves whether we want to continue with these people or
not. Okay, I think it's very nice to see how that's all of that conversation around leadership and governance has actually really here centered on trust, perhaps driven by the questions, but seems to fit in very well with it. There was another question related to trust as well, which is, should we have trust giving in parallel with trust building?
Yeah, can I react upon that? Yeah, trust, yes, definitely, because trust is very much related to the concept of reciprocity. And reciprocity is a balanced reciprocity. You can have an unequal reciprocity or negative reciprocity, meaning I give a lot and I don't get anything back. I give trust to you, but you don't trust me. Or a general reciprocity, which is, we trust each other, we are family and we trust each other. But especially in this kind of project, we see balanced reciprocity very much related to trust. So if I help you, and you help me with issues over the time, I give you trust that this will help, and in return I receive. But it's a slowly process of gaining trust, and conscious process in which you, what I say, discuss, have chat. And so this relationship between reciprocity and trust is very, very much tight. It's very tight.
Yes, Ralf.
Some years back, we did a study on the relationship between project managers and their governance system. And it was quite obvious from the results that if the governance system trusts the project manager, then the project managers trust also the governance system. So it is this reciprocity that Alfons talks about. But we also saw that if the governance system does not trust the project manager, if the governance system clearly prescribes process steps and in other things for almost all situations that the project manager comes across, then the project managers start to circumvent the governance system. Yeah, so distrust forces distrust, trust fosters trust. Yeah, it is not a one-way street. It is always back and forth.
No, we still have a little bit more time left. One of the questions here is whether anyone has comments on the application of ISO 37000-2021, Governance of Organisations, Guidance to Project Governance. Is anybody familiar with that and have a view on it? Yeah, Ralf, thank you.
Yeah, I think we need to distinguish between governance models. There are the top-down models, which are also known as comply or get punished models, which are, sorry, the other way around. The bottom-up models are the comply or get punished models, and the top-down models are the ones comply or explain. And typical examples for that is the PMI governance standard, which is very much a bottom-up. Yeah, you have to comply with the processes or you get punished. Yeah, the opposite example is what APM has since many years with the principles for governance of project management. Yeah, where you have principles, and if you cannot live up to these principles and have a good reason for not living up to them, then it's also fine. And in between lies the ISO standard. Yeah, it has components of both. Yeah, it suggests processes, but it does not enforce the use of these processes. Yeah, so it is a kind of a hybrid type of governance, and it then depends on how you read it. Do you read it like a Bible, and like you should read the PEM book from PMI, that you do everything exactly as it is outlined in the document? Then of course it becomes a straitjacket. Yeah, but if you read it as a set of recommendations, yeah, and you pick and choose what is appropriate for you, then it's of great value.
Thank you very much. Okay, now I think we can draw this session to a close, and I would like to thank our panelists very much. And I think if the audience would like that we have here, would like to express your congratulations and thanks in the chat panel. Since we can't actually hear your voices at this time, that would be wonderful. So I think we've had a really good introduction and coverage of governance. Leadership we've been talking about through the day, but here we've actually had really three excellent guides to introduce us and give us more of an understanding of the interaction between leadership and governance. And as I said, I think it is really interesting that in talking about leadership and governance, the questions that this has inspired have tended to focus on trust. So an interesting result from that. And at that point, again, Ralf, Alfons, Andy, thank you all very much indeed for joining us for this session.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.